And there are many twists and turns in the story of Ayn Rand that I follow in the book. I talk about how her growing popularity on college campuses transformed into libertarian activism, the modern libertarian movement, how she remained close to Greenspan as he continued to ascend the political ladder. But perhaps the most surprising twist and turn is something I don't really consider until the very last pages, which is Rand's return in popularity in our present moment. In the past year, Atlas Shrugged has broken all sales records. It's on track to sell more than 300,000 copies this year alone. There's been a Rand renaissance of sorts, a vogue for, quote, going Galt, which is to follow the example of the hero of Atlas Shrugged and to restrict your economic production or not work so that you won't be unfairly taxed. Her works have been recommended by everybody from Glenn Beck to Rush Limbaugh. So though I wrote this book as history, it turns out it's really essential if you want to understand what's happening today in American culture, society, and politics. Thank you very much.
Professor Burns, I will move to the back of the room, and I invite those who have questions that they would like to ask to queue up with me at the back, and we will be able to take questions for about 25 minutes. So there should be plenty of opportunity to address many of your questions. But let me open with this. We see touches of Ayn Rand in political figures. You've mentioned the chairman of the Federal Reserve. We don't have to look too far, and we see the governor of South Carolina and Senator Edwards in there, maybe. But what is the intellectual legacy? How far does it spread? To what authors do we now see traces of the Randian philosophy?
So that's a great question, and I think that I talk about this a lot in the closing section of my book when I talk about how her ideas moved from this tightly controlled objectivist movement where there really was a party line, and how they were able to sort of break out of that. The NBI Institute was dissolved in 1968, and that sort of set these ideas free on the market, as it were, and you see then a much more ability of people to combine Rand's objectivist philosophy or pieces of her ideas with others. So I think that's really where her main influence comes, in the ability of people to take parts of her and not take all of her. So the objectivists who remain firmly wedded to her philosophy really stay in this objectivist subculture, this objectivist world. It's figures like Greenspan who take some of what she taught him about the rationality of human beings, about the morality of the capitalist system, and marry that with other abilities or other connections to a wider world who really see influence. In terms of the overarching message that she conveys that others don't, it comes down to the morality of capitalism and the idea that selfishness is a virtue. This is an idea that Rand takes further than anyone else. It's an order of magnitude different than the classical liberal discussion of self-interest, or you may be thinking of Adam Smith and the invisible hand. It's got something in common with that, but she extends it into the whole personal realm. So I think today it comes back to us in a willingness to consider capitalism not just practical, not just something that worked better than socialism, not just the sort of system we have at hand, but something that's actually ethical because it allows people to keep the fruits of their labor, and it allows them to enter relationships freely without coercion. That's one of Rand's primary ideas that connects to her opposition to the draft. So.
Yes, hi. I'm Mark Fraser with Open World. I have a question about generosity and the notion of the extended self. Mm-hmm. Rand, in her works, does show a benevolence, a respect for benevolence, as distinct from altruism. And for many people who have children, for example, they define within their extended self the success and happiness of their children and their spouses. and those who share kindred values, kindred ideas, including objectivist ideas. So my question is whether you see a bridge between the individualism and the selfishness that Ayn Rand has so well put forth, and the notion of selfish genes and selfish memes, which Richard Dawkins, E.O. Wilson, and others have suggested that we create progeny that we include within our sense of an extended self and can actually behave, quote, in sacrificial ways to ensure their success.
Right. Well, if there is a bridge, it's not one that Rand built. One is she was very out of tune with biological or evolutionary thinking. It wasn't something she focused on. She also, there's definitely room in her philosophy for caring about other people, and I think it's easy to not notice that, but it's always a choice, and it's always built, as you said, upon shared values. I think one place that objectivism has trouble applying to is what you call about family life obligations, and that there's very few children, there's very few intact families in her novels, and families are generally portrayed as parasitic structures upon, like, for instance, in Atlas Shrugged, the hero Hank Rearden is always, his wife is a social climber who's always trying to spend his money, and his brother's kind of feckless, and so the overall message in the fiction on family is very negative. Now, in the abstract philosophy, could you construct this wider circle of the we? Definitely, but Rand really wasn't trying to get those messages across. And, even the idea of the virtue of selfishness, Nathaniel Branden was like, don't use the word selfishness. It's going to give people a really bad impression. It's not quite what you mean. And she wouldn't be budged on it. So she didn't mind being really inflammatory and being really controversial. I think family is a major area that objectivism doesn't address very effectively.
Yes. It seems that on Ayn Rand, whole philosophy and everything came from her experience of living in Russia with a educated Jewish family who worked hard and had their wealth, as opposed to having wealth in Russia at that time coming from nobility and serfs and all that. Okay, so I'm curious, what kind of novel do you think she would have written had she been, say, the child of a farmer in the United States, our republic, capitalist society, whose family was run because the wind blew the father's organic wheat into Monsanto's, fields, or let's say more recently, somebody had been very hardworking and put all their hard life savings and trusted Bernie Madoff and his investing capitalists. What kind of novel do you think she would have written, and what would have been her attitude towards capitalism in that case?
Okay, so, wow. I do know probably what she would say about Madoff and what made Madoff possible, and she would reject that he was in any way selfish in the ethical selfishness that she intended, but she felt that having government regulate business was a bad idea because they could never do it properly. So she would probably say, look, you started something called the SEC, and it was bought out by a rich, corrupt person, and that's exactly what happens when you set up government regulation. It gets captured or bought out by the wealthy. So there wasn't a whole lot that Rand could see, and she could always fit it into her system. Hardworking farmer whose crop is destroyed by the forces of nature. That's an interesting one. I'm not sure what she would do with that. She always emphasized that man had to sort of fight back against nature and was not an environmentalist by any stripe of the imagination. Rand's attitude on Monsanto is something that would be speculative of me to address, so just keep it at that.
My question is embarrassingly simple after this discussion. I'm just curious about how you came to be the first person to get access to her letters. How did that come to be?
Okay, I can tell you the story, but there seems to be there's a mystery to it on some ways. So the Ayn Rand archive is part of the estate of Ayn Rand. It's held by the last standing member of the collective, her most loyal follower and student. And he has until recently been very protective of her legacy, and it's been really only open to confirmed objectivists or people working within the objectivist scholarly network. I approached them as a graduate student at Berkeley. I said, this is my scholarly background, and I would like to come and look at these papers. And they said, come on down. So, it was terrific. They have not been as forthcoming with other writers interested in Rand. I think there's still a sensitivity about some of the interpersonal aspects of Rand's life that she's been very criticized for. I think that I was treating her as a serious figure and interested in the intersections of her life with other major figures in American history was very attractive to them. So I've actually been writing a lot about my experience in the archive on my blog, which is on my website, which is jenniferburns.org, because I keep getting these questions, and it's this sort of, I feel like I've been penetrated this fortress, and I saw a lot of great, interesting stuff. One thing I write about is that the letters and journals that the estate has released have in fact been edited. And it's not, there's no ellipses where words have been removed or changed or anything like that. So that's unfortunate. The fortunate part is they are letting people in there and comparing what was taken out and what was included. So that was a major part of my research, kind of working through that. So I can only hope that this is the beginning and that there's sort of an era of glasnost, or they are opening up a little bit more. And I think there's been an attitudinal shift that being so protective of Rand's legacy and trying to control it so much has maybe backfired. So I'm not sure what will happen next, but that was certainly a fascinating part of the project, a stressful part of the project as well, because I did all this research, and then there's a separate stage when you have to request permission to publish. So it's like any archive where you can go in and look at everything, and then when you're ready to publish, you need to talk to the heir. And so I had to do this with many people whose material I used, but because they had so much from the archive and because they hadn't let an outsider publish this before, I was very anxious about it. And they gave me the go-ahead. It was like a few weeks before I had to turn the manuscript in, so I was very glad they didn't say the opposite thing. It would have been tough. So.
In listening to what you said about Ayn Rand, two philosophers came to mind for me: Socrates, as described in Plato's Dialogues, and Nietzsche. And so I'm wondering, what works did Ayn Rand read, and to what extent she was influenced by what she read?
So I actually spend several chapters talking about the influence of Nietzsche on her thought. It was the first book she bought in English when she got to America. It was Thus Spoke Zarathustra. She read a lot of Nietzsche, and she took this sort of emphasis on self-overcoming, and she took the basic idea of transvaluation of values, flipping what is good into what is evil and vice versa. So taking something like selfishness and saying this is in fact a virtue. So I think she picked up from Nietzsche this sort of intellectual trick of flipping things around and showing they're not what you seem, or arguing they're not what you seem. So that's a very pervasive influence. It does begin to lessen, particularly after she has her volunteer experience, and I think American politics kind of gives her an appreciation of the common man or of American democracy that she hadn't had before, and so Nietzsche becomes more muted. But when she was drafting The Fountainhead, originally each section of the book was going to be prefaced with an aphorism from Beyond Good and Evil. And there's Nietzsche's idea of ressentiment that's very much part of envy of people who are more accomplished than you. There's multiple connections between her and Nietzsche, so that's something I explore in the book. As to Plato, she hated him and considered him the father of collectivism.